Right, so the events of October 7th have now been completely and utterly dismantled. And it is one of Israel's own people that has done the dismantling. And who better, frankly, to tell the truth now, the guy who ordered it? Former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, now wanted on an international arrest warrant, has finally admitted that so-called Hannibal Directives were ordered on the night of October 7th. Orders for the IDF, as they are, to target their own people, their own civilians, in order to prevent them from being taken hostage. There has been circulatory imagery and videos for months seemingly to bear this explanation out. There have been statements from eyewitnesses claiming to have seen the directive being implemented. But now a government official, the guy in charge of defence at that time, has admitted they were used. And that means every single death from that night can no longer be levied solely at Hamas without an independent investigation taking place. An independent investigation must now be carried out to ascertain the absolute truth. Because Israel's entire justification for all of the atrocities they have been committing in Gaza, all justified off the back of what they have claimed to have been an indiscriminate attack by Hamas only on one night back in October of 2023, where Zionists across the world still to this day claim it to be the biggest slaughter of Jewish people since the Holocaust. Well, how many of those Jewish people were actually killed by their own side then, under their own nation's orders? We must know. Right, so the world's biggest open secret has finally been confirmed by former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant in an interview he's given to Israel's Channel 12, where he has admitted that the Hannibal Directive was issued on the night of October 7th, 2023. He was asked, when you see the convoys crossing the border with Israeli hostages, what crosses your mind? Is the Hannibal Directive something you are thinking about in that moment? This term was then clarified by the co-host, who said, just to explain, the Hannibal Directive says to shoot to kill when there is a vehicle containing an Israeli hostage. Gallant then went on to answer, saying, I want you to understand that the ability of the Defence Minister to give timely operational instructions when everything is happening is very limited. But when pressed on the matter of whether or not the Hannibal Directive was given, he then went on to say, I think that tactically in various places it was given, and in other places it was not given, and that is a problem. No, the problem is giving such a barbaric order at all, but having admitted that it was given in some places, but not others, yet the implication of that it was being carried out in those places anyway. The need for a thorough, impartial, and above all independent investigation has never been more obvious, never been clearer. And Israel have consistently blocked any attempts to do so, and it's pretty obvious why now, isn't it? This is an important moment, though, because this is the very first time public admission of this has been made by an Israeli government official of the time that the Hannibal Directive was indeed used. But it was more than a year ago that Israeli outlet Yedioth Ahronoth stated that an unambiguous order by High Command had been given to use the Hannibal Directive across the entire region. It was later in July that Israeli newspaper Haaretz picked up on it, reporting that an order of not a single vehicle can return was reportedly given on October 7th as well. There was also the admission given by Israeli reserve pilot Colonel Nofer Rez, who described October 7th as mass Hannibal, and that was all the way back in November of 2023. The Hannibal Directive, for those still not familiar with this term, was an evil military doctrine cooked up in secret in the 1980s before later becoming public knowledge that amounted to a national murder order, that any Israeli taken hostage, be they military or civilian, be killed by their own side rather than let them be taken hostage and be later used in a hostage exchange deal. Fundamentally, Israel put keeping their Palestinian hostages above the lives of their own people. It was supposedly done away with in 2016, but here it is, now officially alive and kicking and still being used, despite those claims in the past to the contrary. But then they were Israeli claims. Most moral army in the world, folks, that carries out orders to kill their own people. The night of October 7th was called Operation Al-Aqsa Flood by Hamas, who captured some 251 hostages that night from the Nova Music Festival and the kibbutzim nearby. Israel reportedly warned something was coming, both from Egypt and from their own intelligence services, who chose to let it happen and put their own people in harm's way. In fact, the Nova Music Festival was reportedly moved from the Negev desert to just north of Gaza in a move many suspect to have been intentional, to purposely put more of their own people in harm's way. Israel unleashed their Hannibal Directive on that night. We now have this confirmed by the former Defence Minister. So all the shots of helicopters and tanks firing, all conveniently deployed just where they needed them, And the reports of people being killed by Israeli fire, by eyewitnesses, have now all been reinforced. All despite 15 months of Hamas being blamed solely for the devastation of that night. Nobody is excusing their role. Nobody is excusing the fact they instigated it. But exactly how much of what they have been accused of versus Israel's assault, which we now know included the ordering of the killing of their own people, well, we need to have this investigated, don't we? There can be no acceptable reason for Israel to refuse now. Say for this news, well, just not getting reported, because as sure as night follows day, Western media are completely ignoring this. I'm sure that won't shock you, though. So what has prompted Gallant to confess all of this now? Well, he's unlikely to face arrest in Israel, is he? Though if I'd lost family members on that night, Israeli or no matter how Zionist my proclivities might be, I'd want to know who killed my loved ones. Was it Hamas or was it my own country? Are some people so far gone out there they simply don't care, and this is why Gallant can be so open and so seemingly unafraid of any repercussions? At least as long as he doesn't leave Israel, I suppose, at any rate. But Gallant's confessions didn't end there, making all this smack as some vengefulness on his part, on his former government colleagues. And given Gallant has announced he's quitting the Knesset shortly, possibly figures he's got little left to lose now. For example, he's laid into Itamar Ben-Gvir for intentionally inciting repercussions when he stormed the Al-Aqsa compound and mosque in Jerusalem and proceeded to pray there, forbidden from doing so as the Jewish population are. And he also took aim at Benjamin Netanyahu over his consistent wrecking of ceasefire agreement after ceasefire agreement, though Gallant's argument was we could have brought back more of our hostages and released fewer of our Palestinian ones that they held if an agreement had been reached sooner. Part of that he also lays blame at the feet of Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, though, for threatening to bring down the government every time a ceasefire deal neared completion. Don't worry though, Yoav, Netanyahu has been taking more from the West Bank, so the dungeons will still be full, I'm sure. It's not exactly going to surprise many, this admission, though, I shouldn't have thought. We've seen Israel raise Gaza from north to south, and they've killed more of their own hostages than they've ever rescued, never having put the hostages first. Few, even in Israel, even believe that. And all of the protests outside Netanyahu's home and elsewhere by hostage families and their supporters calling him out for that does bear that out. They don't believe he's done enough either. Acceptable casualties. Their own fault for getting captured, perhaps. Maybe that's the pervading attitude in Netanyahu's government. Certainly that was also borne out in Gallant's interview, because he was the Defence Minister, of course. And despite 251 hostages being taken by Hamas, instead of negotiating for their release, as always happened before, this time he chose a military response. He apparently insisted on this, despite the warnings of the harm it could do to civilians. And given he'd thrown Netanyahu under the bus in this interview already, this doesn't seem like something he would say to shield Netanyahu from blame over. More, this is just Gallant getting a lot of this atrocity off his chest. There's also no secret that trust broke down between Netanyahu and Gallant either, which resulted in Gallant getting sacked. If Gallant did indeed start the genocide in Gaza, Netanyahu has needed no encouragement to keep it going, after all. Gallant appears to be just the latest in a line of Israeli officials, others like Yaron Finkelman or Herzi Halevi and more, who have taken responsibility for their own failures when it came to security. The only person who refuses to do that is Netanyahu himself, because if he did, well, it would trigger that investigation into what happened that night, wouldn't it? What lapses there were. And he's determined we should not learn what they are, because it would, I am more certain now than ever, destroy him and his government, expose how they may well have engineered that night, and certainly expose how many of their own people they likely killed themselves. Justification of that night used, as it has been, weaponized by politicians across the world to justify what Israel has done, when there can be absolutely no justification for genocide. Now they've raised Gaza, though, Donald Trump would love to see all the people there relocated to Egypt and Jordan, of course, so it can be rebuilt, you understand. Well, Jordan have now declared any attempt to forcibly move the people of Gaza into Jordan would be a declaration of war. So is the Middle East about to explode down yet another front? Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe before you do so, though, to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content and help support the channel at the very same time, which is, of course, very much appreciated too. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.